Good day, Crime Talk aficionados. My name is Scott Reich, and this is Crime Talk. First on the docket today, jury selection begins against a former public official who allegedly killed a reporter who wrote some negative stories about him. Why Richard Allen's defense is falling apart. An update on the Arizona dad who left his daughter in the car in the summer in Arizona. A former bad cop arrested. A Florida teacher's been arrested. The Moscow Mule Mom gets denied, and our dumb criminal of the day. Let's talk about it.
Hi, lawyer.
Good day, everyone. My name is Scott Reich, and this is Crime Talk. Thanks for joining us. You know the drill. Subscribe if you haven't. Like if you do. Leave me a comment below and hit that little bell for notifications. And remember, you can listen to us anytime on any of your favorite podcasting apps. Hope you all had a wonderful weekend. So let's go ahead and get to the docket today for August 12th, 2024. Jury selection begins today for the former Las Vegas area politician accused of killing an investigative journalist who wrote some articles critical of him while he was in office. Now, Robert Tellis, a former Democratic Clark County administrator of estates, has remained in jail since he was arrested back in September of 2022. After the Las Vegas Review-Journal reporter, a guy by the name of Jeff German, was found slashed and stabbed to death outside of his home over Labor Day weekend back in 2022. Now, German became the only journalist killed in the United States among at least 67 news media workers slain worldwide that year. Anyway, prosecutors say articles that Mr. German wrote about Tellis in early 2022 and the office in which he ran regarding turmoil were the motive for the killing. Now, German was found slashed and stabbed, as I noted, in a side yard outside his home, where Tellis is accused of lying in wait to kill German when he came outside. Mr. Tellis was arrested just days after police circulated video of a person wearing an orange work shirt and a white-brimmed straw hat, walking along with a shoulder bag and walking towards Mr. German's home. Like we said, ladies and gentlemen, there are no coincidences in criminal defense. Anyway, police also released images of a distinctive maroon SUV, like one that a Review Journal photographer saw Tellis washing outside his home several days after the killing. Once again, those pesky coincidences. Now, obviously, we'll give him the presumption of innocence. Let's just say there's some coincidences that have to be explained. Anyway, Mr. Tellis became a lawyer back in 2015, then immediately ran as a Democrat in 2018 to become the Clark County Administrator of Estates. Now, after his arrest, obviously, he is no longer in his elected position, and his law license has been suspended. Of course, he could always, reapply if things go well for him in court. Now, he's pled not guilty to the charge of murder, and Tellis maintains police illegally detained him before his arrest. The officer body-worn camera video of the traffic stop during which he was taken into custody was improperly deleted, i.e. destruction of evidence, and the hospital blood tests taken following his arrest and treatment for what he called self-inflicted slash wounds to his wrist were not included as evidence in this case. Yes, always want the jury to know that you attempted to commit suicide, right, ladies and gentlemen? No. Now, the judge has rejected those and other requests to dismiss the case, and Mr. Tellis has hired and fired several attorneys and often served as his own defense lawyer. Tellis has tried to remove the judge, arguing that the judge was biased against him. Those motions were promptly denied. Now, prosecutors say they have a very strong case against Mr. Tellis, including, that pesky DNA, believed to be his from Mr. Tellis, found beneath German's fingernails, and cut up pieces of straw hat and shoes found at Tellis's house that resemble those worn by the person seen on the camera walking outside Mr. German's home. Once again, those pesky coincidences, ladies and gentlemen. Anyway, Mr. Tellis wanted his trial to occur rather quickly, but that speedy trial was delayed in part by a legal battle with the Review Journal took to the state Supreme Court to protect the public disclosure of confidential sources that Mr. German had in his cell phone and his computers. The newspaper argued that the names and unpublished material were protected from disclosure by the First Amendment and Nevada state law. So police argued their investigation would not be complete until the devices were actually searched. for possible evidence. The court gave the newspaper, its lawyers, and the consultants time to review the files as well. An attorney representing the Review Journal told the court last week that the process would be completed in time to turn over records to the police, prosecutors, and Tellus's lawyer before jury selection begins. Not a whole lot of time if it hasn't been turned over yet. And then the defense would have to investigate possible alternate suspects of people that maybe had a beef with Mr. German. Anyway, now Mr. Tellus obviously could face life in prison if he's convicted, and he has remained in jail the entire time up to trial. But like I said, we'll give him the presumption of innocence. Next on the docket, why Richard Allen's defense is falling apart. Now, for those of you who maybe haven't been following this, Richard Allen is a married father and was arrested and charged with the murders of Libby German and Abigail Williams back in November of 2022. Now, Libby and Abby were allegedly abducted and murdered while hiking along a trail in Delphi, Indiana, hence the name, the Delphi Murders. Now, this took place back in February of 2017. Now, a lot of information has not been shared about this particular case because the detectives wanted to really keep it under seal so that a lot of information wouldn't get out there because they were obviously investigating many, many people during the course of the some 5 years that passed from the murders until when Mr. Allen was arrested. Now, Mr. Allen was arrested, like I said, some 5 years later after an unspent .40 caliber bullet discovered between Libby and Abby's body was allegedly traced back to a pistol that he owns. Now, in police interviews, Allen admitted to being in the same areas as the girls were when they were killed, wearing an outfit nearly identical to that of a man captured on Libby's cell phone, warning her to go down the hill. Now, it is interesting to note that Allen literally went and talked to the police early on, but because an FBI contractor misfiled his report, basically it wasn't until some 5 years later that they went back and reviewed everything and found Allen's statement that he was there at the scene of the crime or nearby. So anyway, much of the evidence in this case remains, like I said, under seal. There's been some strict gag orders in this case, which I really don't understand. But during a hearings that took place last week, an abundance of new evidence came out and shared for the first time, really. Now, investigators shared that the belief that Libby and Abby were abducted at approximately 2:14 p.m. on February 13th of 2017 and killed somewhere between 2:30 p.m. and 3:30 p.m. Now, the timeline in part was put together by data from Libby's iPhone, the same device used to capture the footage of her alleged killer. Now, Allen's defense team has argued that German's phone was turned on at 4:33 a.m., pinged a nearby tower, and received more than a dozen text messages. The defense argued that this was due to the phone and possibly the girls themselves being moved to another location and then brought back to where they were ultimately found deceased later on February 14th. Now, investigators discovered Libby's phone beneath her body and under one of her shoes. Now, Allen's attorney said the evidence supports their theory that a group of men with ties to the pagan Norse cult of Odinism killed Libby and Abby and not Mr. Allen. The defense suggests that the girls may have been killed elsewhere and that the crime was staged, which would have been difficult for Allen to pull off all by himself. Prosecutors, meanwhile, argue that Libby's phone data is not so clear-cut. However, the phone suddenly began receiving messages again more than 12 hours after the girls were killed, is currently under investigation, and the device is being subject to some new tests, which obviously will have before the trial date. And apparently the phone is being forensically examined because a lot has changed as it relates to the technology and the ability to extract information as today than it was back in 2019 when it was first done. So Patrick Cicero, a blood specialist and forensic expert, testified, and his purpose was to try to prove that the defense's claim that the girls may have been killed elsewhere and brought back to where they were found was simply not true. Now, Cicero spoke in detail and about some of the testimony about the blood found at the crime scene and what it showed, according to him, about the girls and their last moments of life. Now, having reviewed the crime scene photos and other documents, Cicero testified that Abby Williams likely was murdered while lying down. Libby, meanwhile, was cut while standing and eventually sat down, according to Cicero's analysis of the blood patterns. Now, he further testified that the position of Libby's body suggested she has been dragged by one arm to where the killer eventually left her there. Now, Cicero didn't believe her body positioning was staged, more so the result of how Libby was moved. Now, the expert also pushed back on the argument made by the defense that the blood smeared on a tree near the girls was purposely painted for the letter F, which holds some significance in Odinism cults sacrifices. Anyway, instead of an Odinistan rune, Cicero said that the smear was more likely a transfer stain from Libby's bloodied hand. Now, purposely painting a symbol on the tree would have involved the killer repeatedly dipping their hand in blood, he said, which would have been almost impossible. Now, while upsetting to listen to, Cicero's testimony established the girls were most likely killed where they were found. So based upon this and some of the other testimony that was heard, the Odinist argument really has kind of fallen apart. This was their big moment that the defense was going to try to come out with and basically say, hey, this is our alternate theory, our alternate suspect here. But it really just hasn't come out the way they were hoping for it. So there's really not a whole lot of evidence that Libby and Abby were killed in some sort of ritualistic sacrifice, at least not from the motions hearing. Now, Allen's attorneys claim that the scene was staged and various Odinistic letters were left behind, including runes made out of sticks and the girl's blood. However, the defense hasn't really been able to place any of the 4 alleged Odinists that they accused of murder in the Delphi area on the day of the killing. Like, that's what we've talked about before, ladies and gentlemen. The prosecution always has to prove that it was the defendant, not someone who looked like them, but in fact was the defendant that did the killing. You can't really go to alternate suspect unless you have a good faith basis and you can show that somebody else was actually there that had kind of the opportunity to kill somebody. And if you can't do that, the judge can probably limit whether you're going to be allowed to present that particular defense. Anyway, the prosecutors have also asked the judge to throw out all of the testimony regarding Odinism because they say the defense lacks the evidence to support their claims, and the testimony will confuse the jury. Now, the defense attorneys called multiple witnesses to speak to their Odinist theory, including Dr. Dawn Perlmutter, an author who identified herself as an expert in ritualistic crime scenes. After reviewing not all of the discovery, but a small sampling of the photos and other evidence in the case, Miss Perlmutter told the court, in her opinion, this was a textbook ritualistic murder. Now, Perlmutter said that the way the girls were killed, how the bodies were positioned, where they were found, and the symbolism present at the crime scene had all the elements of a sacrificial murder. Now, Libby and Abby were found in the woods near a body of water and their throats were slit, both of which Perlmutter said are typical of killings perpetrated by people with magical beliefs or just good old-fashioned killers. Anyway, Perlmutter also argued blood smeared on a tree in one leaked crime scene photo was painted to form the letter F, which holds significance in Norse mythology. She also said branches left atop the girls' bodies appears to have been placed for able to form a runic symbol. When asked if she had any doubts that Libby and Abby were sacrificed by Odinist, Perlmutter responded, none at all. Now, under some pretty intense questioning from the prosecutors, Perlmutter admitted her findings were based upon a limited set of the evidence and not all of the discovery in the case. And the district attorney sought to discredit Perlmutter by highlighting the fact that she shared the same opinions about the case on court TV last year, even before she had seen any evidence in the case. I think they refer to that as confirmation bias, perhaps. Anyway, we'll see. Anyway, additional issue facing the defense is the fact that Allen has allegedly confessed to the murders at least 60 times since his arrest. Now, many of the confessions were made to his wife and mother, and some contain details only the alleged killer would have known, according to prosecutors. Now, in one alleged confession, Allen allegedly claimed he killed Libby and Abby with a box cutter and later disposed of their murder weapon in a dumpster outside of his work per the prosecution. Now, a state detective testified at the hearing that Allen made dozens of confessions to family members during more than 150 hours of conversations while he was in custody. And according to the detective, those confessions began as early as March of 2023 after Allen had, quote, come to a Jesus moment, end quote, and started reading a Bible in his prison cell, proclaiming that he had found God. Allegedly, Allen expressed a wish to atone for what he'd done to the two girls so that he could basically be reunited with his family in heaven. The most recent confession allegedly was recorded earlier this year, according to prosecutors. And Allen's wife and mother apparently reacted with disbelief, anger, and shock at his confessions, according to the detective. And they're messing with your mind, or stop talking about it. Anyway, the detective testified that Allen expressed fear his family would no longer love him after trial, particularly after seeing graphic images of the girl's body. Now, the police also testified directly to more confessions to other inmates. A lead investigator at the prison said where Allen is being housed testified, and Dr. Monica Walla, a prison psychologist who met regularly with Allen, both testified about Allen confessing to the murders. Now, Allen's defense team contends that their client's confessions were false and the result of his apparent steep decline of his mental health. The defense has also claimed Allen was suffering from a case of stress-induced psychosis that was triggered by being unjustly locked up in solitary confinement for months on the end and treated like a prisoner of war. Now, Dr. Walla testified that Allen's mental health began to deteriorate back in April of 2023, days after his first reported confession. And according to Dr. Walla, Allen started expressing suicidal thoughts and feelings of hopelessness. Now, there were prison guards reportedly saw Allen banging his head on the wall to the point where his face was severely bruised, the doctor also testified. And Allen was also reported to have consumed his own feces. Ick. Anyway, Allen's attorneys pointed to Walla's testimony as evidence their client was in the throes of mental health crisis when he allegedly confessed to killing Libby and Abby. Now, they also claimed that Allen was coerced into falsely confessing due to extreme conditions of his incarceration. But Allen's attorneys have also asked the judge to dismiss his self-incriminating words as evidence in his forthcoming trial, which the judge has taken under advisement. I think that's going to be denied. However, prosecutors argued that the confession should be allowed to remain because they were no attempt to force Allen to say a single word. The prosecutions also argued that there was no custodial interrogation and that he was fully aware that his statements were unsolicited. And Dr. Walla also expressed concern that Allen may have been faking some of his psychotic symptoms. The doctor's own notes seem to question whether Allen was purposely behaving bizarrely. Now, the good doctor also acknowledged that there were times when she was not certain whether Allen was legitimately going through a mental health crisis or feigning psychological behavior. Now, another detective also testified that the prison security personnel, guards, correctional officers, they get kind of offended if you call them guards, correctional officers assigned to keep an eye on Allen when he was on suicide watch did not believe his symptoms were real either. So this was a case, ladies and gentlemen, where there was a lot of stuff to work with. And don't get me wrong, I don't know all the facts of the case. But, they really had a shot when it came to the Odinist thing. But then they weren't able to back it up. And don't get me wrong, we went through it all. I was like, man, this probably wasn't done by just one person, as it's alleged, based upon their motions that were filed, specifically the Frank's motions as it relates to the police not putting in all of the relevant information that was used to establish the probable cause for arrest for Mr. Allen. But in this particular case, it really has fallen apart. And then came the alleged confessions. How many times have we said this, ladies and gentlemen, on the show? Anything you say can and will be used against you. People sometimes think that, it's only when I'm talking to the police after they've read me my Miranda rights. No. It's an admission by a party opponent. Anything you say comes in as long as it's relevant, obviously. And in this particular case, if Mr. Allen has, confessed some 60 times to his wife, his mother, fellow inmates, his psychologist, the reality of it is that's not good for the defense. Now, I don't want, it's easy to sit here and play armchair quarterback of, oh, they should have done this, they should have done this. But I think maybe the defense got a little over their skis here and they got a little too cute. This is the type of thing that when you do a lot of pretrial motions, and yes, you need some clarity, but this is what people oftentimes think, is that there's going to be some magic motion that's going to make a case go away. That happens in very, very few cases. You need to save all this stuff for trial. So now all this stuff has been litigated, for lack of a better term, basically debunked by the prosecution. I don't think that Judge Frances C. Gull is going to give it a whole lot of weight. I'm not sure she's going to allow any question of these 4 people that they're allegedly accusing of committing this crime when you can't place them in the vicinity of the crime. I think the judge will probably try to say, hey, I don't want to shut down the entire defense because then I may get reversed on appeal, but it's going to be really pared down. They're going to have to go with an alternate suspect, but then you got the bullet, which frankly I think is the least of his concerns. The confessions are bad. Him in the area at the time, ladies and gentlemen. And, I was kind of hoping maybe they got the wrong guy. They kind of botched the investigation up big time, but his defense is crumbling. Hopefully, I don't know, it may be time to seek a plea deal. Just something to think about, ladies and gentlemen. Let me know your thoughts. Next, an update on that not-so-great Arizona dad. The Arizona father who left his young daughter to die in a baking hot car while he played video games inside his home, became quite defensive and said, so I'm being treated like a murderer? When the police confronted him, Christopher Schultes also broke down when police responded to his home on July 9th and found his 2-year-old daughter Parker clinging to life in the family car, where he claimed to have left her with the air conditioning on for just a half an hour because he didn't want to wake her up. So, I'm being treated like a murderer. That's what he told the police after they told him that he might be a crime scene, raising his voice on the body cam footage. And when police arrive and were trying to save Parker, Schultes appears distressed, and he held his head in his hands and walked around the home. Now, Parker was discovered in critical condition when her mother, a doctor, came home about 4 p.m. and discovered her in the car with the AC off. In that footage, Schultes tells police he only left Parker outside for no more than 30 to 45 minutes, and then he checked on her throughout, but, well, guess what? That's not the case. It was later revealed he allegedly left her in the car for over 3 hours while he was inside, and that he made a habit of leaving his 3 daughters in the car. The wife apparently said, I told you to stop leaving them in the car. She texted him after the tragedy. How many times have I told you? Their 2 other children even told police their father regularly left them outside in the car, according to the affidavit for arrest warrant, which added that he got distracted playing his games and putting his food away while his daughter was outside dying. And a 16-year-old daughter from a previous marriage has allegedly stated that Mr. Schultes frequently left her alone in a car without food for hours at the time, to the point that the Child Protective Services took her away from him, and that she was surprised that this particular tragedy hasn't happened sooner. Now, Mr. Schultes has pled not guilty to first-degree murder. He is currently on bond. His wife previously asked the judge to release him to come home because they needed to start the grieving process together. And his wife, of course, is standing by him and says this is a big mistake and it doesn't represent who he really is. Maybe it does. I'm sorry. And maybe it's just a generational thing. I get it. I've seen video games. They look fun, whatever. But this guy's like late 30s, early 40s, playing video games on a regular basis. I get it, playing with your kids, but if that's what your adult is doing, you need to start adulting and start doing adult things like taking care of your kids, not playing video games. Maybe I'm just getting old. Maybe that's the way I see it. Anyway, a former bad cop is in custody. That's right. A former Florida police sergeant was arrested Thursday for attempting to pay for sex with a 15-year-old. That's right. The Genesee County Sheriff's Office said that David Morningstar was arrested in July as part of an operation of the Genesee Human Oppression Strike Team, or GHOST. Anyway, Mr. Morningstar had been arraigned on 3 felony charges: child sexual abusive activity, using a computer to commit a crime, and accosting a child for immoral purposes. Now, the sheriff ahead of this GHOST program said that he's never shied away from reporting on anybody, including police officers who's got in trouble. And the sheriff said that Mr. Morningstar was arrested as part of a sting operation, and Morningstar thought that he was responding to trafficker who was selling sex with a 15-year-old, but it was actually an undercover detective posing as an underaged teen. Now, prior to him coming to the location, he stopped at the Kroger to review the conversation just to make sure that he heard right, that he read right, that she was actually 15, according to the sheriff. Anyway, the sheriff said Mr. Morningstar was a former police officer in Millington and Clio before he moved to Longsboat Key, Florida, south of Tampa, where he served for 12 years and was ultimately promoted to sergeant. He was not an active police officer at the time of arrest. He did not have identification on him. He did not have a badge or a gun, so we know that he was no longer employed. The sheriff believes that the arrest stresses the importance of holding everyone accountable, especially those in position of power. How many times have we said it, ladies and gentlemen? You are in a position like that, you need to do it better and cleaner than the next guy. Obviously, the sheriff's concern was that if it wasn't a sting operation, that he would have been meeting with somebody who actually was selling a 15-year-old. Anyway, Morningstar turned himself in to the Genesee County District Court on Thursday and released on a $44,000 personal recognizance bond. The conditions of Morningstar's bond require him to avoid contact with children under the age of 18. Next, another bad teacher, and coincidentally in Florida. That's right, a Florida elementary school teacher, take a look at this guy, was arrested last week for allegedly sending sexual messages to a 14-year-old via an app. The Deltona elementary school teacher by the name of Michael Ronald Iacone knew the teen was underage. Of course he did. According to the sheriff's office, deputies were notified by the school district on August 5th that the 14-year-old had come forward with the allegations. The deputies confirmed the teacher's identity and continued online conversations with the suspect using the student's account. And in the course of those communications, Iacone allegedly discussed various sexual acts. Investigators also discovered that some of the conversations took place while he was at work at the elementary school. Well, the deputies made an arrest a few days later, and Iacone admitted to knowingly discussing sex acts with a juvenile over the app. He's been charged with transmission of material harmful to a minor by electronic devices and unlawful use of a two-way communication device. He was booked into jail and released on a $4,500 bond. Good segue, ladies and gentlemen. Go to CrimeTalkSearch.com. Get that background subscription that everybody needs so that you can do a background check on anyone that's in your life. You know, new boyfriend, new girlfriend, I don't know. Maybe the people that are teaching your kids, maybe a quick background check. You never know. Anyone coming in your life, you're going to be able to do a search, get a report while you wait, and you can do as many searches as you desire as long as you have the subscription. And remember, you can cancel that subscription at any time. But the report is going to give you information as to whether they're on one of those public registries. That's right. Whether they have a criminal history. Should they not be around anyone under the age of 18? Are they married? Have they been divorced? Do they have judgments against them? All the things that you want to know about the people that you are either going to be bringing into your life or even doing business with. So go to CrimeTalkSearch.com. You'll be happy you did. Yes, the Moscow Mule Mom, guess what? Denied. So more than a year after Corey Richins was arrested for allegedly poisoning her husband, the case is finally moving forward to preliminary hearing after a judge dismissed a motion to disqualify the prosecution. Now, the motion sought to disqualify the prosecution due to the allegations that the prosecutors violated Richins' Sixth Amendment right by intruding on attorney-client privilege. The concerns rose after jail staff and prosecutors allegedly accessed phone calls between Richins and her attorney. However, documents say that after the jail staff member and attorney realized that the calls were an attorney and inmate call, they immediately turned off the recording and did not hear any privileged information. That happens all the time, ladies and gentlemen. That's not a motion to recuse the prosecution or even the judge. For this reason, Judge Richard Razik ruled there was no credible evidence of an intentional intrusion on the attorney-client privilege and dismissed the motion. Now, the defense provided no opposition during the hearing to the judge's conclusion, and there were some pretty strongly words in that opinion, basically alluding to the possibility the defense lawyers were purposely using it to pave the way for a possible retrial in the future. And the prosecution called the accusations that they violated Richard's right speculative at best and bad faith at worst, adding that if this wasn't thoroughly addressed, it could be a possible grenade in the future of the trial. The court did note it's also wrong for lawyers to intentionally throw a wrench into the gears of the system of justice to intentionally procure a fundamentally flawed proceeding. Now, Corey Richards is facing charges of aggravated murder and 3 counts of possession with intent to distribute. She has faced several hiccups while awaiting trial, including the withdrawal of her defense team back in May, and the preliminary hearing is now scheduled for August 26th. And finally, our dumb criminal of the day. Yes, a group dubbed the Reflector Vest Crew was arrested following a joint operation of the North Hollywood Division Detectives and the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. Together, these two teams investigated a string of high-end residential burglaries in affluent Los Angeles neighborhoods, including Studio City, West Los Angeles, and West Hollywood between March and June of this year. The group would reportedly focus on luxury items like watches, jewelry, and designer purses. Eventually, they were caught in the act during a burglary in Studio City, and the primary suspects have been identified as Roderick Dennis, Michael Mitchell, and Munya Jones. Now, it seems like they had a plan that they would all work together, and they would send a member wearing a reflector vest dressed as a construction worker to knock on doors so it wouldn't raise any suspicion. This was done to see if anyone was home, and if nobody was, guess what? They burglared the place. Anyway, the police say that they used some pretty sophisticated techniques to escape the crime and to disguise themselves. So it doesn't sound like these were just petty street criminals. They appeared to be professionals. But guess what, ladies and gentlemen? What got them? That pesky video. Gee, you think they have any video in high-end neighborhoods in Los Angeles? Of course they do. And eventually they spotted a car and they got there. So yes, the Reflector Vest Crew, you are our dumb criminals of the day. Congratulations, you made it. I got an idea. How about you just keep your grubby little paws off of everybody else's stuff? If it's not your stuff, you don't touch it. Didn't your mom ever teach you, keep your hands to yourself and you don't touch things that don't belong to you? Remember that, ladies and gentlemen. All right, that's all we have for today, everybody. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time on Crime Talk. And yes, the Constitution matters.